You'll come back when reality hits.
You have no choice. I never needed your permission.
I'm sorry.
I needed your respect before you knew my worth.
I understand.
The conference room fell silent as Isabella Carter picked up the pen. Her husband, Ethan, watched with cold satisfaction, certain the divorce papers would finally make his useless wife beg. His mother sat beside him, already pleased. Their attorney waited. They had no idea the quiet woman they treated like dead weight had a hidden identity tied to boardrooms, sealed accounts, and decisions powerful men still waited for. Isabella did not cry. She signed. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 months earlier, the marriage had already started ending in silence. Isabella had learned to recognize the sound of Ethan's disappointment before he spoke. It was in the way he dropped his keys into the glass bowl near the door. It was in the way he sighed when he saw her at the kitchen counter reading quietly, instead of performing some version of a wife his mother would approve of. It was in the way his eyes passed over her simple sweater, her plain wedding band, the modest apartment she had once chosen with him, because she thought peace mattered more than appearances. Ethan used to say he loved that about her. Now he called it lack of ambition. He worked in corporate development for a rising technology firm in Chicago, and lately every conversation in their home seemed to circle back to status. Who had just bought a lake house? Who had been invited to a private investor dinner? Who had married into money? Who had upgraded? Ethan said that word often now, usually when he thought Isabella was not listening. Upgrade, as if a marriage were an old car, as if a wife could become outdated. Isabella never corrected him. She made coffee in the mornings. She kept her consulting work vague. She told him she still handled family paperwork, and Ethan never asked what kind. He had decided years ago that her family was ordinary. Her mother's last name, Carter, sounded plain enough. Her clothes were simple enough. She never drove anything expensive, never wore jewelry that announced itself, never asked for more than she needed. That was the version of her Ethan understood. It was also the only version he had ever cared to investigate. His mother, Margaret, cared even less. She arrived every Sunday with polished nails, sharp perfume, and opinions that never waited to be invited. She inspected Isabella's home like a hotel room she had already decided was beneath her. She commented on the furniture, on the meals, on Isabella's work schedule, on the fact that Ethan was outgrowing the life he had settled for. Isabella never answered sharply. Not because she was weak, because she knew the difference between defending herself and handing cruel people more of her peace. That irritated Margaret most. A woman who has nothing should at least be grateful, Margaret said one Sunday, while Ethan stared at his phone and pretended not to hear. Isabella looked at her calmly. Gratitude and obedience are not the same thing. Ethan finally looked up then. Not to defend her, to warn her with his eyes. That was when Isabella understood something she had been avoiding for months. Ethan no longer wanted a partner. He wanted someone who made him feel superior when the world made him feel small. The first sign of betrayal came through a message she was not meant to see. Ethan's phone lit up on the bathroom counter while he was in the shower. A name appeared across the screen. Vanessa Reed. The message was short. You deserve a woman who looks like she belongs beside you. Isabella stood there for a moment, towel in hand, staring at the words until they stopped hurting and started explaining things. The late meetings, the new cologne, the sudden gym membership. The way Ethan smiled at his phone and frowned at his wife in the same breath. She put the towel down and walked away. That night, while Ethan slept, Isabella sat at the small desk near the window and opened her encrypted email. There were 3 unread messages waiting from Adler Whitcomb and Rowe, the law firm, that had represented her family for 2 generations. One subject line read, "Board approval pending." Another read, "Transition documents require signature." The third was marked urgent. Isabella did not open it right away. She looked across the room at Ethan sleeping on his side, turned away from her, as if even in dreams he needed distance. For a moment she thought about telling him everything, about the trusts, about the voting shares, about the grandfather whose quiet empire still shaped companies Ethan would have given anything to enter. But truth given to the wrong person did not become intimacy. It became leverage. So she closed the laptop. She had not hidden her identity to trap him. She had hidden it because she wanted one relationship in her life untouched by money. One person who saw her before seeing what stood behind her. For a long time, she had believed Ethan was that person. Now she was beginning to understand that he had only loved her when her simplicity made him feel safe. Once ambition entered the room, he mistook her quiet life for a small one. 2 weeks later, Margaret came over without calling. Ethan was already home dressed too carefully for an ordinary evening. A folder sat on the coffee table. Beside it was a pen. Isabella noticed the details first. The fresh haircut. Margaret's controlled smile. Ethan's nervous thumb rubbing the edge of his watch. The way neither of them offered her a seat until she took one herself. Ethan cleared his throat. "We need to talk about the future," he said. Isabella looked at the folder. Margaret leaned forward, satisfaction already forming on her face. "It's better this way, dear," she said. "Ethan needs a wife who can stand beside him, not someone he has to carry." Isabella reached for the folder and opened it. Divorce papers. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Ethan watched her face, waiting for panic. Margaret watched for tears. Both of them wanted proof that she understood how powerless they believed she was. But Isabella only read the first page. Then the second. Then the third. Her expression did not change. The papers were not final. Not yet. They were a draft aggressive and insulting, written to scare a woman who did not know the law and had no money to fight back. Unfortunately for them, Isabella knew more about contracts than the attorney who had prepared it. She closed the folder gently. "I'll review this properly," she said. Ethan blinked. "There's nothing to review. It's generous." "No," Isabella said softly. "It is not." Margaret's smile faded. Ethan's phone buzzed on the table. He turned it over too quickly, but Isabella had already seen the name. Vanessa. That was the moment her last hesitation left her. She stood, picked up her leather portfolio from the chair beside her, and walked toward the bedroom without raising her voice. Behind her, Margaret muttered something about pride. Ethan said nothing. Inside the room, Isabella opened her laptop again. This time she clicked the urgent email. A secure document filled the screen. At the bottom, beneath a block of legal language, one line waited for her approval. No transition may proceed without Isabella Carter's authorization. Before she could sign, her phone rang. The caller ID showed only 2 words. Board office. Isabella did not answer the call immediately. She let the phone ring twice while she looked at the urgent document glowing on her laptop screen. The bedroom door was closed, but not locked. Ethan was still in the living room with his mother, probably explaining to himself why Isabella's calm reaction meant she had not understood what was happening. That had always been one of his favorite comforts. When she did not collapse, he assumed she was confused. The phone rang a 3rd time. Isabella picked it up and lowered her voice. "This is Isabella." A man answered with the careful respect of someone who knew exactly who he was speaking to. "Ms. Carter, I apologize for calling this late. The board office asked me to confirm whether you received the transition packet." "I received it." Mr. Adler also wanted me to remind you that the voting window closes tomorrow at noon. Without your authorization, the scheduled restructuring cannot move forward. Isabella looked toward the door. In the next room, Margaret's voice rose in a sharp whisper. Ethan answered too low for Isabella to hear. She could imagine his face anyway. Irritated, defensive, performing confidence for his mother while hiding panic from himself. "I understand," Isabella said. There was a small pause on the line. "Should we proceed with the preparation documents?" "Prepare them," she said. "Do not submit anything until I review the final language." "Yes, ma'am." The word still made her uncomfortable. It always had. She had spent years avoiding rooms where people spoke to her that way, rooms where her family name arrived before she did. She had wanted a life where no one stood straighter when she entered. A life where someone made coffee for her because they loved her, not because they were paid to know how she took it. That was why she had become Isabella Carter instead of Isabella Whitmore. Her mother's last name had given her cover. Carter was ordinary enough to disappear inside. Whitmore opened doors before a person had earned them. Her grandfather had built that name into something heavy, something attached to private holdings, investment trusts, quiet acquisitions, and people who never appeared on magazine covers because real money did not need applause. Ethan knew none of it. When they met 5 years earlier at a charity finance workshop downtown, Isabella had introduced herself as a consultant helping small businesses clean up their books. That was true in the smallest possible way. She had been volunteering through one of her family's foundations, though she never said that part. Ethan had been there representing a struggling startup that needed funding and polish. Back then, he had seemed hungry but kind. He had listened when she spoke. He had asked questions. He had admired that she carried her own umbrella and took the train home in the rain. He used to say she made success feel less lonely. For a while, she believed him. Their first apartment had been small, with thin walls and a kitchen window that looked straight into another brick building. Isabella had loved it because it was theirs. Ethan had loved it because it felt temporary. At first, temporary had sounded hopeful. Later, it became an accusation. "You're too comfortable with small things," he told her once after a dinner with one of his new senior directors. "That's the problem." Isabella had asked. "Since when is peace a problem?" He had laughed like she had missed the point. Maybe she had. Or maybe he had. The change had been gradual enough to excuse then, sharp enough to wound. Ethan began correcting her in public. Small corrections, her wording, her clothes, the way she introduced herself. He stopped asking about her consulting work because he assumed it was unimportant. When she took calls from her family office, she stepped outside or used vague phrases. Ethan never pressed. He thought privacy meant there was nothing impressive to discover. Margaret helped him believe it. "She's sweet," Margaret had said, after their second anniversary dinner, when Isabella was carrying dishes into the kitchen. But sweet does not build a future. Ethan had not defended her. He had smiled in that uncomfortable way he used when he wanted the moment to pass without costing him anything. That smile became the shape of their marriage. Isabella ended the call and placed the phone face down beside the laptop. She opened the top drawer of her nightstand and removed a slim black folder. Inside were copies of documents Ethan had never bothered to read. Not because she had hidden them from him, but because he had decided anything connected to her could not be important. A premarital agreement, separate property disclosures, trust references written in careful legal language, enough to protect what had existed before the marriage, but not enough to explain it to someone who did not care to understand. She touched the edge of the folder, then slid it into her leather portfolio. In the living room, Ethan said her name. Not gently. Not with concern. "Isabella? Are you done hiding?" She closed the laptop before stepping out. Ethan stood near the coffee table. Margaret sat behind him like a judge who had already sentenced her. The divorce draft lay between them. "I'm not hiding," Isabella said. Margaret gave a small laugh. "Then stop acting like you have options." Isabella looked at the folder, then at her husband. "I do have options." Ethan's face tightened. "You don't have to make this ugly." "No," she said. "I don't." Something in her calmness unsettled him. He glanced at the leather portfolio in her hand, then back at her face. "What's in that?" he asked. Isabella held it a little closer. "Paperwork," she said. Ethan took one step toward her. At that exact moment, her phone lit up again on the desk behind her. This time the message preview was visible from where Ethan stood. Board vote confirmed for tomorrow. Authorization still pending. Ethan saw the message before Isabella could turn the phone over. His eyes narrowed at the words on the screen, but only for a second. Confusion moved across his face, then irritation covered it. That was how Ethan handled anything he did not immediately understand. He made it smaller. He made it sound ridiculous. He made it someone else's problem. "Board vote," he said. "What is that supposed to mean?" Isabella crossed the room and picked up the phone. "It's work." Margaret gave a soft, dismissive laugh from the sofa. "Work. That little bookkeeping thing again." Isabella did not look at her. "Something like that." The answer annoyed Ethan more than an explanation would have. He had always hated when Isabella kept a door closed inside herself. Not enough to knock, only enough to resent the fact that it existed. "This is exactly what I mean," he said. "You act mysterious about nothing. You take calls, hide emails, carry that portfolio around like you're some corporate attorney, and then you expect me to believe you're building something real." Isabella held the portfolio against her side. "I never asked you to believe anything." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You just expect everyone to keep pretending." Margaret stood then. She moved slowly as if the room belonged to her, and Isabella was only occupying space in it. "Ethan has been patient with you. More patient than most men would be. He has a career now. He has people watching him. He cannot keep dragging around a wife who refuses to grow with him." The words landed harder than Isabella wanted them to. Not because they were new, because Ethan did not stop them. He looked away. That was worse than agreement. It was permission. Isabella opened the leather portfolio and slid the draft divorce papers inside. Ethan noticed and reached toward it. "Leave those here," he said. "No." The word was quiet, but it changed the room. Margaret blinked. Ethan's hand froze halfway between them. Isabella looked at him evenly. "If you want me to review a legal document, I'll review it with my own counsel." Ethan let out a sharp laugh. "Your own counsel? With what money?" There it was. The sentence he had been waiting to say. The one that explained the whole meeting. He believed the threat was financial. He believed she would fold because he thought she had no independent strength, no resources, no people behind her, no history beyond the life he had allowed her to have beside him. Margaret smiled again. "We are trying to be civilized, Isabella. Do not embarrass yourself." Isabella zipped the portfolio. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're not taking my papers to some discount lawyer who's going to fill your head with nonsense. They are not your papers once you hand them to me." He stared at her. For the first time that evening, a small uncertainty entered his face. Isabella saw it and felt no pleasure, only a tired sadness. She had spent years hoping he would look at her closely. Now he finally was, and only because she had stopped obeying the version of her he preferred. His phone buzzed again on the coffee table. This time he did not turn it over fast enough. Vanessa Reed's name appeared, followed by a message preview. Did you tell her yet I don't want to keep waiting while she plays victim? The room went very still. Margaret saw it. Ethan saw that Margaret saw it. Isabella saw all of it. For one brief moment, Ethan looked almost ashamed. Then pride came to rescue him. "This isn't about Vanessa," he said quickly. Isabella nodded once. "Of course not. Don't do that. Do what? Act calm like you're above being hurt." That almost made her smile. Not because it was funny, because it was cruel in such a familiar way. He had wounded her, and now he wanted control over how she bled. "I am hurt," Isabella said. "I'm just not available for humiliation." Margaret's face hardened. "You should be more careful with your tone. My tone is the least serious thing in this room." Ethan moved closer, lowering his voice. "You don't want a fight, Isabella. Trust me. The apartment is in my name. Most of the accounts are in my name. You've been living here because I allowed it to be easy for you. I can make this process very uncomfortable." Isabella looked at the man she had once loved. The man who used to wait outside her office with takeout because he knew she forgot dinner when she worked late. The man who had once told her he admired her independence. Somewhere along the way, he had turned her quiet generosity into evidence that she owed him submission. She reached into the portfolio and removed one sheet. Not the trust documents, not the board authorization, not anything that would reveal what he was not ready to know. Just a copy of the premarital agreement receipt showing that both parties had retained separate counsel before marriage and that financial disclosures had been exchanged through attorneys. She placed it on the coffee table. Ethan looked down. His expression shifted. Margaret frowned. "What is that?" "A reminder," Isabella said. "This will not be handled in your living room." Ethan picked up the page, scanning it too quickly. "This old paperwork doesn't mean anything. It means I have counsel. It means I have records. And it means if you want a divorce, you can file properly." Margaret scoffed. Now she suddenly knows the law. Isabella turned toward her. "No, I always did." That silenced her for half a breath. Ethan's phone buzzed again. He snatched it up this time, but Isabella had already seen enough. She did not need to read another message. Vanessa was not the cause of the marriage ending. She was only proof that Ethan had already chosen the kind of woman he thought would make him look successful. Isabella walked to the hall closet and took out a small overnight bag. Ethan followed her. "Where are you going?" "Somewhere quiet. You're being dramatic." "No," she said, folding one sweater into the bag. "I'm being done for tonight." He stood in the doorway watching her pack with the confused anger of a man who had expected begging and found boundaries instead. Margaret called from the living room. "Let her go, Ethan. She'll come back when she understands the real world." Isabella paused with her hand on the zipper. The real world. She almost turned then. She almost told them that the real world had been calling her all evening, waiting for her signature, waiting for her vote, waiting for her to approve decisions involving numbers Ethan practiced saying at networking dinners like prayers. Instead, she zipped the bag. By the time she reached the front door, Ethan had recovered enough to sound cruel again. "Don't expect me to chase you," he said. Isabella opened the door. "I never did." She stepped into the hallway and closed it softly behind her. Only when she reached the elevator did she let herself breathe. Her phone was still in her hand. There were 2 missed calls now from the board office, and 1 encrypted email from Adler himself. She opened the email as the elevator descended. The message contained only one line. "Ethan Cole's employer has been added to tomorrow's acquisition review." Isabella read the email 3 times before the elevator reached the lobby. "Ethan Cole's employer has been added to tomorrow's acquisition review." The words sat neatly on the screen, but there was nothing neat about what they meant. Ethan's company, Northbridge Systems, had been circling a major transaction for months. He had mentioned it at dinner at parties, even in arguments, always with the same hungry brightness in his voice. If Northbridge landed the deal, he said senior leadership would finally notice him. If the acquisition closed, he might be moved into the strategy team. If he performed well enough, he could become the kind of man his mother believed he was meant to be. He had no idea the final review now led back to Isabella. She stepped out into the lobby carrying one overnight bag and the leather portfolio Ethan had mocked. The night security guard looked up from the desk. His name was Martin. He had worked in the building for 6 years and always greeted her with a kind nod, never asking questions, never pretending familiarity. "Evening, Mrs. Cole," he said, then paused when he saw her bag. "Good evening, Martin." His eyes moved briefly to her face. He saw enough to understand something was wrong, and enough kindness remained in him not to demand the details. "Do you need a cab?" called Isabella. Almost said no out of habit. She had spent so long refusing help that even small kindnesses felt like debts. But tonight she was tired of performing strength for people who used her silence against her. "Yes, please," she said. Martin nodded and reached for the desk phone. Of course, while he called. Isabella opened the email again and scrolled to the attached memorandum. It did not reveal everything. It did not name her publicly. It simply identified Whitmore Capital Partners as the acquiring party and listed the next morning's review committee. Northbridge Systems appeared on page 4 under Strategic Assets. Ethan's division was mentioned twice. She should have felt satisfaction. She did not. She felt the heavy ache of a woman who had just learned that the man humiliating her in his living room might walk into a boardroom tomorrow and discover she had been standing at the center of his future all along. Not because she had arranged it, not because she wanted revenge, because the world Ethan chased had always been closer to her than he ever imagined. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Nathaniel Adler. She answered before the second ring. "I saw the memo. I assumed you would," Adler said. His voice was calm, older, polished by decades of saying difficult things carefully. "I need to know whether Ethan Cole's connection creates a conflict you want disclosed before the vote." Isabella looked through the glass doors at the street outside. Cars moved through the wet Chicago night headlights, shining over pavement, people passing under umbrellas, all of them going somewhere with their own private damage. "Not yet," she said. A pause. Isabella. The use of her first name told her he was no longer speaking only as counsel. Adler had known her family since before she took the Carter name. He had been there through the estate restructuring after her grandfather's death. He had watched her walk away from boardrooms not because she was incapable of leading them, but because she had wanted one part of her life to remain untouched. "I'm not protecting Ethan," she said. "I'm protecting the process. I know. No one at Northbridge should be treated differently because of my marriage. And you." She closed her eyes for 1 second. "I'll be treated exactly how the documents require." "That is not what I asked." The cab arrived before she could answer. Martin opened the lobby door for her. Cold air touched her face sharp enough to steady her. "I need a place for tonight," she said. "The executive residence is available. No staff announcement. No special arrangements." "Understood," Adler said. "Security will be discreet. Not security, just access." Another pause. "Very well." She ended the call and got into the cab. The executive residence sat on the quiet upper floors of a restored building near the river. To anyone else it looked like a private long-term rental used by traveling executives. That was part of its purpose. It had belonged to her family's office for years, one of several properties reserved for board members' counsel and visiting partners who needed privacy rather than spectacle. The doorman recognized her before she reached the entrance. He did not say her last name. "Good evening, Miss Carter." "Good evening." He handed her a keycard from behind the desk without being asked. "Mr. Adler said you might arrive tonight. Suite 2804 is ready. No one else has been notified." "Thank you, Paul." The gratitude seemed to matter to him. He lowered his voice. "I hope you get some rest." That small sentence nearly undid her more than Ethan's cruelty had. In the elevator, Isabella stared at her reflection in the dark, mirrored wall. She looked composed. That was the strange thing. Her hair was still smooth, her coat still buttoned correctly. The portfolio rested against her side like any ordinary work folder. But inside, something had shifted. She was not going back to beg. She was not going back to explain her worth to people who had already priced her too cheaply. She would handle the divorce properly. She would handle the board review properly. And if those two worlds collided, she would not lie to soften the impact for Ethan. Inside the suite, the lights came on automatically in a warm, quiet glow. The rooms were elegant but not loud. Neutral furniture, a desk facing the river, a kitchen stocked with basics. No flowers, no champagne, no performance of luxury. Just space. Isabella placed the overnight bag near the bedroom door and set the leather portfolio on the desk. For the first time that night, her hands trembled. She let them. Then she opened the portfolio, removed the divorce draft, and placed it beside the acquisition memorandum. 2 documents. 2 different versions of the same mistake. In one, Ethan believed she was powerless. In the other, his future waited for her signature. She opened her laptop and logged into the secure portal. The board packet appeared, followed by a notification blinking in red. Final authorization required by 12 p.m. Below, it was a second message just received. Northbridge Systems has requested Ethan Cole be added to tomorrow's presentation team. Isabella stayed seated at the desk long after the notification appeared. Northbridge Systems had requested Ethan Cole be added to tomorrow's presentation team. The sentence felt almost impossible in its precision. Not impossible because it was unlikely. Impossible because it was too human. Ethan had pushed her out of their home believing she had no place in his future, and now his future had been placed in a file that required her review. She did not move for several seconds. Then she opened the Northbridge packet. The first pages were clean and polished, filled with the kind of corporate language Ethan admired. Strategic alignment, operational synergy, long-term value capture, phrases designed to make ordinary decisions sound larger than the people affected by them. Isabella read through them carefully, not as Ethan's wife, not even as the woman he had tried to corner with divorce papers, but as the person whose signature could move millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs into a new future. That responsibility steadied her. Money could be loud in the wrong hands. In her grandfather's office, it had always been quiet. It moved through contracts, payroll health plans, pensions, severance protections, supplier agreements. It changed lives most deeply when no one clapped for it. She scrolled to Ethan's division. His name appeared under the supporting team, Ethan Cole, Senior Manager, Corporate Development. Below his name was Vanessa Reed. Isabella's fingers paused over the trackpad. Vanessa was listed as Director of Strategic Partnerships. Her professional biography was sharp, impressive, and carefully written. Northwestern MBA, 7 years in enterprise integration. Lead on 3 mid-market transactions. Ethan had not chosen someone foolish. That made the betrayal feel different, not more painful exactly, more deliberate. He had not simply fallen toward attention, he had walked toward ambition, and dressed it up as love. Isabella opened a separate document and began making notes. Not emotional notes, not accusations, questions, missing labor integration costs, unclear retention terms, incomplete disclosure around vendor concentration, a risk paragraph that seemed too vague for a company seeking acquisition approval. The more she read, the more her expression changed from wounded to focused. By midnight, the divorce papers sat untouched beside her coffee. The acquisition file had taken over the desk. At 12:18 a.m., her phone buzzed. Ethan. She let it ring out. A message followed. You made your point. Come home tomorrow and we'll discuss this like adults. Isabella stared at the words. Like adults, as if adulthood had been available when his mother called her a burden. As if he had not presented divorce papers like a punishment. As if Vanessa's name had not been lighting up his phone while he threatened her financial future. She did not respond. Another message came 2 minutes later. Don't embarrass me by dragging this out. That one told her more than an apology would have. He was not worried about the marriage. He was worried about the appearance of losing control. She took a screenshot, saved it to a folder labeled Personal Record, and set the phone aside. At 7 the next morning, Ethan stood in the bathroom of the apartment, adjusting his tie with more force than necessary. He had slept badly. Margaret had stayed late, rehearsing every version of why Isabella would return. Pride would run out. Money would run out. Reality would humble her. Ethan had wanted to believe that. But the apartment felt different without Isabella in it. Not sad, exactly. Unmanaged. The coffee was not made. His gray suit was still at the cleaner because he had forgotten to pick it up. The presentation file he needed had not been printed. His calendar had 2 overlapping meetings he had assumed Isabella would notice and fix, because she always noticed things before they became problems. He told himself none of that mattered. Vanessa texted at 7:12. Big day. You ready? He smiled for the first time that morning. Almost. Isabella made drama last night. Vanessa answered quickly. Do not let her pull focus. Today is about the acquisition. If this goes well, you and I finally stop waiting. Ethan read the message twice. It warmed him and unsettled him at the same time. Vanessa understood the world he wanted. She knew the names, the rooms, the timing. She did not ask him to be content with small things. She made his ambition feel justified. He texted back. After today, everything changes. At 9:40, Ethan arrived at Northbridge Systems carrying a laptop bag and a confidence he had rebuilt in the elevator. The office buzzed with a nervous kind of energy. People moved faster than usual. Conference rooms had been reserved. Assistants carried printed decks. Executives who rarely appeared before 10 were already behind glass walls, speaking in low voices. Vanessa met him near the strategy floor. She looked perfect. Cream blouse, navy skirt, hair pinned neatly, expression controlled. She touched his arm just briefly enough to pass as professional. You're on the presentation team, she said. I saw. That means leadership trusts you. Ethan breathed in the sentence like oxygen. Vanessa lowered her voice. And after this, no more messy personal delays. Your wife needs to understand the marriage is over. The words should have felt harsh. Instead, Ethan heard them as clarity. She will, he said. She has nowhere else to go for long. Vanessa smiled slightly, then let her learn that. Neither of them noticed the senior vice president step out of the boardroom behind them, holding a tablet with the updated agenda. Neither of them noticed his face tighten when he heard Isabella's name spoken with such casual disrespect. At 10:15, the Northbridge team gathered in the main conference room. The long table was filled with executives, finance leads, counsel, and outside advisors. Ethan took his seat along the wall, not at the table, but close enough to feel chosen. Vanessa sat 2 chairs ahead of him. The CEO entered, last followed by Northbridge's general counsel. Before Whitmore Capital arrives, the CEO said, I want everyone clear. This is not a casual review. Their final authorization structure is unusual. We are not presenting only to analysts. We may have someone from the controlling side of the fund present today. Ethan leaned toward Vanessa. Controlling side. She whispered, "Family office, probably. Old money people. They like theater." Ethan smirked. The door opened before he could answer. A gray-haired man in a tailored suit entered first. Ethan recognized him from a market profile. Nathaniel Adler, senior counsel to Whitmore Capital. Every executive at the table stood. Then Adler stepped aside and looked back toward the hallway with quiet deference. "Ms. Carter, he said they're ready for you." Isabella stepped into the room without rushing. For one strange second, Ethan's mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. He saw his wife in the doorway. Then he saw Nathaniel Adler waiting half a step behind her, not beside her. Behind her. He saw the executives around the table still standing. He saw the CEO of Northbridge Systems straighten his jacket with the nervous care of a man preparing to impress someone whose opinion mattered. And still, Ethan told himself there had to be another explanation. Maybe Isabella was here with Adler. Maybe she had taken some assistant role. Maybe Carter was a coincidence. Maybe the room had stood because of Adler, not because of her. Vanessa turned first. Her face changed quickly, but not completely. She was too trained for that. Surprise flashed through her eyes, then calculation replaced it. Isabella noticed. She noticed Ethan, too. His hand was still resting on the edge of his notebook. His mouth had parted slightly. He looked less like a man caught in betrayal, and more like a man whose map had been taken from him. "Good morning," Isabella said. Her voice was calm. Not warm, not cold. Professional. The CEO of Northbridge stepped forward. "Ms. Carter, welcome. We appreciate you joining in person. Thank you, Mr. Langford." Ethan's breath caught at the name. Mr. Langford had not used Isabella's married name. He had not called her Mrs. Cole. He had not sounded confused by her presence. He had spoken to her as if she belonged in the center of this room more than anyone else. Adler moved to the empty seat near the head of the table, but he did not sit until Isabella did. That was when the first real crack opened in Ethan's understanding. Isabella took the chair at the head of the table, not near it, not beside counsel. At the head. A senior partner from Whitmore Capital's transaction team opened a slim folder. For the record, this meeting is a final strategic review regarding Whitmore Capital Partners' proposed acquisition of selected Northbridge Systems assets. Present today are representatives from Northbridge Leadership Legal Counsel and the Controlling Authorization Office. The Controlling Authorization Office. Ethan felt Vanessa go still beside him. Mr. Langford cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, before we begin, should we address authorization protocol?" Isabella folded her hands on the table. Briefly, Adler spoke, then, "Ms. Carter holds final approval authority for the voting trust involved in this transaction. Any recommendation today remains advisory until she signs the authorization after review." The words moved through the room like cold water. Ethan looked at Isabella. Final approval authority. Voting trust. She did not look away from the documents in front of her. His wife, the woman his mother had called dead weight less than 24 hours earlier, sat at the head of a boardroom where his CEO was waiting for her permission. It was not possible. But everyone in the room was behaving as if it was. Vanessa recovered first. "Ms. Carter," she said smoothly, "it's a pleasure. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Isabella looked at her then. "No," she said. "We have not." Nothing in her tone exposed the messages. Nothing exposed the late-night texts or the way Vanessa had spoken about her. That restraint made Vanessa's smile tighten. Ethan wanted to speak. He wanted to say Isabella's name, to demand an explanation, to drag the room back into a private argument where he could still pretend he knew her. But his mouth would not cooperate. His professional instincts fought with his panic. In this room, she was not his wife. She was the person Northbridge needed. The presentation began. Slides appeared on the wall. Vanessa spoke first polished and confident. She described partnership value, integration potential, and strategic upside. Ethan watched Isabella's face more than the slides. She listened without expression, making notes in a narrow margin. She did not seem impressed or offended. She seemed exact. Then Ethan's section arrived. Vanessa turned slightly. Ethan will walk us through the operational growth model. Every eye shifted to him. He stood too quickly, nearly catching the chair behind him with his knee. A few people looked down at their papers. No one laughed. That made it worse. He opened the deck and began speaking. His voice held for the first minute. Then Isabella asked her first question. Your model assumes a 22% efficiency gain in year 2. Which cost category carries the largest reduction? Ethan blinked. He had rehearsed the broad answer. He had not expected that. Primarily vendor consolidation, he said. Isabella glanced at the page. That accounts for less than a third of the projected gain. What carries the rest? Vanessa leaned forward. We can provide supplemental detail after the meeting. I would prefer the answer now, Isabella said. The room went quiet. Ethan looked at the slide, then at his notes. He had not built that part of the model. Vanessa's team had. His name was on it because leadership wanted him visible. We anticipated labor efficiencies, he said carefully. Isabella's pen paused. Meaning layoffs. Mr. Langford shifted in his chair. Ethan felt heat rise under his collar. Potential restructuring depending on integration outcomes. Yet your retention plan describes employee continuity as a core value of the acquisition. Isabella looked from Ethan to Vanessa. Which statement is accurate? Vanessa's smile disappeared. Ethan heard his own heartbeat. This was not revenge. That was the terrible part. Isabella was not humiliating him for pleasure. She was doing the job. She had found a weakness because there was a weakness to find. And he had walked into the room unprepared because he had believed style could cover substance. Adler watched quietly from beside her. The rest of the meeting moved with painful precision. Isabella questioned vendor risk. She asked about management incentives. She requested clarification from legal. She corrected one timeline without looking at the backup materials. Northbridge's CFO began answering her directly, bypassing Ethan entirely. By the end, Ethan had stopped pretending. He sat with his hands clasped under the table, staring at the woman he had lived beside for years, without knowing the shape of her mind, let alone the scale of her power. When the meeting adjourned, Mr. Langford thanked her twice. Vanessa gathered her papers with controlled hands. Ethan remained seated. Isabella stood. For 1 second, her eyes met Ethan's. There was no triumph there. That hurt more than anger would have. As she turned to leave, Adler leaned toward her and spoke low enough that only those closest heard. The executive committee is ready upstairs, Miss Carter. They're waiting for your decision on Northbridge. Ethan heard Adler's words clearly. The executive committee was waiting for Isabella's decision on Northbridge. For a moment, no one moved. Not Ethan, not Vanessa, not even Mr. Langford, whose face had settled into the careful neutrality of a man who knew a room had shifted and wanted no part in the personal wreckage underneath it. Isabella gave Adler a small nod. I'll be there in 5 minutes. She gathered her documents, slid them into the slim folder she had carried in, and turned toward the door. Ethan stood before he understood he was standing. Isabella. Her name landed wrong in the conference room. Too intimate for the space. Too late for the woman. Several executives looked away. Vanessa stared down at her tablet. Mr. Langford's jaw tightened. Isabella stopped, but she did not turn fully. Mr. Cole, if you have anything relevant to the transaction, please route it through your leadership team. Mr. Cole. The formality struck him harder than anger would have. Last night he had threatened her with accounts and apartment leases. This morning she had placed him inside a professional boundary so clean he could not cross it without embarrassing himself. His face flushed. I need to speak to you. This is not the time. Vanessa rose then, trying to recover the room. Perhaps it would be best for everyone if personal issues stayed outside the transaction. Isabella looked at her at last. Not sharply, not dramatically, just directly enough that Vanessa's posture changed. I agree, Isabella said. That is why I asked questions about the model, not about anyone's personal life. No one missed it. No one could prove what it meant. That made it worse. Isabella left with Adler. The door closed behind them, and the room exhaled in a way Ethan wished he had not heard. His career had always depended on being seen as controlled, strategic, ready for bigger rooms. Now the biggest room he had ever entered had watched him discover that his wife was not the woman he had described to them in private jokes and tired complaints. Mr. Langford turned to him. Ethan, take the rest of the morning. I can continue, Ethan said too quickly. No, Langford said. Take the morning. The kindness in the wording did not hide the order. Vanessa gathered her laptop without looking at him. Ethan followed her into the hallway, anger finally finding a place to go. You knew, he asked. She stopped near the glass wall. Of course I didn't know. She's your kind of people. Old money, capital, family office. You didn't recognize her. Vanessa's eyes hardened. Don't make your wife my failure. The word wife sounded different now, less disposable. She never told me, Ethan said. Vanessa lowered her voice. And why would she? Based on what I just watched, you gave her every reason not to. That hit him unexpectedly. Not because Vanessa was wrong, because she was already stepping away from him. You said you wanted us to stop waiting, he said. I said after the acquisition, she replied. And now the acquisition depends on the woman you humiliated last night. He stared at her. Vanessa glanced toward the executive wing. You need to handle this carefully. If you create a scene, you won't just lose your marriage. Then she walked away. By noon, Ethan's name had already begun moving through the company in whispers. Not loudly, not officially. That was the nature of corporate embarrassment. It traveled softly, wearing shoes that made no sound. Assistants became polite. Colleagues stopped mid-sentence when he entered. His manager canceled their afternoon check-in and replaced it with a meeting invite from Human Resources for the next morning. Subject Professional Conduct Review. Ethan opened the email twice, as if the words might rearrange themselves. They did not. At 12:43, Margaret called. Well, she demanded before saying hello. Did she come back? Ethan stood in an empty stairwell between the 9th and 10th floors. He had gone there because he could not stand the glass walls of the office anymore. No. What do you mean, no? He rubbed his forehead. Mom Isabella was at Northbridge today. So did she come to make a scene? No. His voice dropped. She was there with Whitmore Capital. Margaret went silent for a rare, complete second. What does that mean? It means she's connected to the acquisition. Connected how he closed his eyes. He still could not say it properly. The words felt too large in his mouth. She had approval authority. Margaret let out a breath that sounded almost annoyed. That doesn't make sense. Isabella, our Isabella. Our Isabella. The phrase turned his stomach. She was sitting at the head of the table, he said. The CEO stood for her. Adler was with her. Maybe she works for them, Margaret said, grasping quickly. Maybe she's some assistant to the lawyers. She asked questions no assistant would ask. Margaret's voice sharpened. Then you need to fix this. Go to her. Apologize if you must. Tell her last night was emotional. Tell her we all spoke too strongly. Ethan leaned against the stairwell wall. You called her nothing. I said what I said because I thought she was holding you back. And now another silence. Then Margaret said quieter. Now we know she may be useful. Ethan opened his eyes. There it was. Not remorse. Recalculation. For the first time all day, he heard his mother the way Isabella must have heard her for years. Not protective, not loving. Measuring. He ended the call without answering. Across town, Isabella sat in a private conference room with the executive committee. She had approved a delay, not a rejection. Northbridge would be given 48 hours to correct its labor assumptions, strengthen retention protections, and disclose internal conflicts connected to the presentation team. She had not named Ethan. She had not named Vanessa. She had simply required integrity where the documents had tried to hide convenience. When the meeting ended, Adler remained behind. You were more generous than some would have been. I was fair. Yes, he said. That is what I meant. Her phone lit up on the table. Ethan. She watched it ring until it stopped. Then another message appeared, not from Ethan, but from a number she did not know. Mrs. Cole. This is Northbridge HR. We need to confirm whether you are willing to provide a confidential statement regarding events that may affect tomorrow's conduct review. Isabella did not answer the HR message right away. She read it once, then again, letting the words settle before she decided what kind of truth she was willing to give. A confidential statement sounded simple on a screen. In reality, it meant turning a private wound into a professional record. It meant explaining that the man under review had handed his wife divorce papers the night before a major acquisition meeting, while another woman on that same presentation team was sending him intimate messages. It also meant power, not the kind Ethan had chased, the quieter kind, the kind that required restraint. Adler watched her from across the conference table. He did not ask what the message said. He had always known when silence was not emptiness but work. Finally, Isabella typed back. I am willing to provide factual information relevant to professional conflicts only. Please send the appropriate process and confidentiality terms to my counsel. She copied Adler. Then she set the phone down. That was measured, Adler said. It needed to be. It also could have been satisfying to say more. Isabella looked at the city through the conference room window. Satisfaction is not the same thing as peace. Adler's expression softened, but he did not praise her. She was grateful for that. Praise sometimes felt too close to being managed. At Northbridge, Ethan sat in a small HR conference room the next morning with a paper cup of coffee he had not touched. Across from him were a human resources director named Marlene Ross, Northbridge's associate general counsel, and his direct manager, Paul Henley. Nobody looked angry. That was worse. Anger left room to argue. Documentation did not. Marlene began calmly. Ethan, this is a preliminary review. It is not a disciplinary hearing at this stage. At this stage, Ethan repeated. Yes. His manager looked uncomfortable. Paul had always liked him. That small fact had helped Ethan believe this would be handled quietly. Marlene continued. Concerns were raised yesterday regarding potential conflicts of interest professional judgment during the acquisition presentation and whether personal relationships may have compromised preparation or disclosure. Ethan's throat tightened. This is because of Isabella. No general counsel said. This is because of your conduct. The distinction landed hard. Ethan leaned back. My personal life has nothing to do with my work. Usually we would agree, Marlene said. But when personal relationships involve multiple members of a presentation team, a prospective controlling party, undisclosed conflicts, and possible influence over internal staffing recommendations, the company has a duty to review. Vanessa's name had not been spoken yet. Ethan still felt it enter the room. He looked at Paul. "You know my work." "I do," Paul said quietly. "That's why this is difficult." Marlene opened a folder. "We also need to ask about text communications between you and Director Vanessa Reed concerning your marital status, the acquisition timeline, and comments made regarding Ms. Carter." Ethan felt heat crawl up his neck. "Those are private. They may remain private," General Counsel said, "unless they relate to workplace conduct or conflict disclosure. We are asking you to preserve them." Preserve, not delete, not explain. Preserve. Ethan understood then that this was no longer something he could smooth over with charm performance or outrage. The people around him were not his mother. They did not care whether Isabella had embarrassed him. They cared that he had exposed the company to risk. By noon, his promotion track was officially paused pending review. Vanessa's calendar disappeared from the shared strategy schedule. At 12:27, she texted him, "Do not contact me about personal matters." He stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Across town, Isabella sat in Adler's office reviewing the divorce response. The aggressive draft Ethan had sent through his attorney had already been answered with a clean, formal letter. No drama, no insults, no emotional language. It requested proper financial disclosure, acknowledged the premarital agreement preserved all separate property rights, and proposed a temporary communication protocol through counsel. Ethan had wanted her to beg. Instead, she had answered with procedure. "Are you comfortable with this?" Adler asked. Isabella read the final paragraph again. It stated that all direct personal contact regarding divorce terms should stop unless both parties agreed in writing. It was not cruel. It was a boundary. "Yes," she said. "Then we send it." He did. For the first time in 2 days, Isabella felt something in her body release. Not happiness, not victory, just the beginning of space. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Ethan. Then again. Ethan. Then a third time. Adler glanced at the screen. "You don't have to answer." "I know." That was new. Or maybe it had always been true and she was only now believing it. She let the calls pass. The fourth call came from Margaret. Isabella almost laughed, but no sound came out. She watched the name glow on the screen, remembering the woman in her living room saying she had no options, remembering the satisfied smile, remembering the word useful. She declined the call. A voicemail appeared seconds later. Isabella did not play it. At the apartment, Margaret stood beside Ethan while he read the letter from Adler's office. Her face had gone pale in patches beneath her makeup. "She hired that man," Margaret whispered. Ethan did not answer. "She can't afford Adler." Still, Ethan said nothing. Margaret's voice dropped. "Ethan, who is your wife?" That question, finally spoken aloud, seemed to fill the apartment. Ethan looked down at the signature block on the letter. Nathaniel Adler, senior partner. Below it, in smaller type, one line he had not noticed before counsel to Whitmore Capital Partners and the Carter Voting Trust. Ethan's phone buzzed with a new email from Northbridge HR. "Preliminary findings require follow-up. Your access to acquisition materials has been temporarily suspended." Ethan read the HR email while Margaret stood over his shoulder. "Preliminary findings require follow-up. Your access to acquisition materials has been temporarily suspended." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The apartment felt too bright, too quiet, too exposed. The same room where Margaret had sat like a queen the night before now looked smaller than Ethan remembered. The coffee table still held the unsigned divorce draft, The pen was still there, uncapped, useless. Margaret reached for the printed letter from Adler's office again. Her hands were careful now. Not confident. Careful. Carter Voting Trust, she said slowly. What exactly is that Ethan took the paper from her? I don't know. You work in corporate development. I said, I don't know. His voice came out sharper than he intended. Margaret stepped back, offended, but Ethan could not apologize. He was looking at the words the way a person looks at a crack in the wall and finally understands the whole house may not be stable. Counsel to Whitmore Capital Partners and the Carter Voting Trust. He searched the name on his phone. The results were thin, which somehow made them more frightening. A few legal filings, a reference in a private equity journal, a charitable foundation with no photographs, a Delaware trust registration that revealed almost nothing. Whitmore Capital appeared more clearly: infrastructure technology, healthcare, logistics, minority positions in companies Ethan had studied for years. Not flashy, not public-facing. Powerful in the way closed doors were powerful. Then he searched Isabella Carter. Almost nothing. That absence scared him more than a billionaire profile would have. Margaret sat down slowly. She hid this from you. Ethan looked up. There it was, her first instinct. Not shame, not grief, not even concern for what Isabella had endured in this room. Blame. A way to make the wound point outward. She signed a prenup, Ethan said. I signed it too. You were young. I was 30. You trusted her. No, he said, quieter now. I ignored it. Margaret's face tightened. She did not like that answer because it created responsibility where she preferred insult. Well, whatever she is still your wife. You should go to her before lawyers make it worse. She told me not to contact her directly about the divorce. Margaret's mouth flattened. Since when do you take orders from her? Ethan stared at his mother. For the first time, that sentence sounded ugly. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Vanessa. Not a message, a formal email. Ethan opened it with a nervous thumb. Effective immediately, I am recusing myself from all Northbridge acquisition matters pending internal review. Please do not contact me regarding personal issues, the transaction, or Ms. Carter. It was copied to HR and legal. He lowered the phone. Vanessa had not just stepped away. She had put distance on record. Margaret leaned forward. What is it? Nothing. But it was not nothing. It was the sound of a door closing softly enough to be professional. Across the city, Isabella reviewed the final divorce response in Adler's office. The room was quiet, lined with books that looked used instead of decorative. Adler's assistant had brought tea without asking too many questions. Isabella appreciated that more than she could say. Her own attorney for the divorce, Mara Ellison, sat beside Adler with a yellow legal pad covered in precise notes. Mara was in her late 40s, direct in the way good attorneys often were when they had seen too many people confuse emotion with strategy. The response is clean, Mara said. We are not escalating. We are preserving your position. We acknowledge the agreement request full disclosure and keep communication through counsel. Good, Isabella said. Mara looked at her over the rim of her glasses. Do you want to allege misconduct? Isabella knew what she meant. Vanessa, the texts, the pressure. Margaret, the staged meeting, the financial threats, not unless it becomes legally necessary. That is your choice. It is. Mara nodded once. Then we keep the record factual. Factual. Isabella liked the word because it did not ask her to perform pain. It simply held the shape of what happened. Adler slid another folder across the table. The executive committee accepted your delay terms. Northbridge has 48 hours to revise labor and disclosure sections. And Ethan. He has been removed from acquisition materials pending their internal review. Isabella looked down at her hands. That consequence had been predictable, but it still hurt. Not because she wanted him spared, because part of her remembered how proud he had been of that project. He had chased it so hard he lost sight of the person sitting across from him at dinner. Mara watched her carefully. You did not cause that. I know. But knowing did not make it painless. By late afternoon, Northbridge released an internal update. No names, no scandal. Just a notice that the acquisition review had been extended to allow additional diligence, with emphasis on employee retention conflict disclosure and governance review. Ethan read it at his desk after HR restored access to only his ordinary files. The promotion he had wanted was gone from his calendar. His manager had not said it directly, but he did not need to. No leadership track while under review. No presentation role. No private meetings with Vanessa. No control. At 5:18, he received one more email. This one came from Mara Ellison. Mr. Cole, I represent Isabella Carter in connection with the dissolution matter. Attached, please find formal response to your proposed terms. All future communications regarding the divorce should be directed to counsel. He opened the attachment. The language was calm, professional, merciless in its dignity. No begging, no pleading, no emotional collapse. At the bottom he saw Isabella's full legal name typed in the caption. Isabella Carter Whitmore. His breath stopped. Whitmore, the name that had been on every acquisition document. The name on the capital firm. The name his CEO had treated like gravity. Margaret called again, but Ethan did not answer. He kept staring at that name until the letters stopped looking like letters and became a sentence he should have understood years ago. Then another email arrived, this time from Northbridge's executive office. You are required to attend a follow-up governance meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Ms. Isabella Carter Whitmore will be present. Ethan attended the governance meeting the next morning and said very little. Northbridge did not fire him. Isabella had not asked for that, and the company would not turn a personal failure into a public execution just to make the room feel satisfied. But his promotion was withdrawn. His role was narrowed. Vanessa was reassigned away from acquisition work after her own conflict review. The deal continued without them at the center of it. That was the part Ethan found hardest to accept. The world did not explode. It simply moved on without needing him. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. There was no courtroom scene, no shouting, no dramatic public collapse, just attorneys' disclosures, signatures, and the slow humiliation of facts. The premarital agreement held. Isabella kept what had always been hers. Ethan kept what was properly his. The apartment lease ended quietly. Margaret stopped calling after Mara Ellison sent one firm letter about direct contact. On the final day, Ethan sat in a downtown law office and signed the last property acknowledgement with a hand that no longer shook. Across the table, Isabella signed after him. She wore a simple gray coat and no jewelry except the same plain wedding band she had not yet removed. That small detail hurt him more than he expected. I'm sorry, he said. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. Not coldly. Not softly, either. I believe you're sorry now, she said. But I needed respect before you knew what I owned. He had no answer for that. She removed the ring, placed it in a small envelope, and slid it into her bag. Then she stood. Take care of yourself, Ethan. There was no promise in it. No open door, just decency. He watched her leave, and finally understood that the hidden billionaire wife was never the real story. The real story was that she had offered him love without conditions, and he had treated it like something cheap because it arrived without proof of wealth. Months later, Ethan saw her again on a Business Channel interview he had not meant to watch. Isabella Carter Whitmore sat under soft studio lights, introduced as Executive Chair of Whitmore Capital Partners and Principal Authority of the Carter Voting Trust. The host asked about leadership inheritance and why she had stayed private for so long. Isabella never mentioned Ethan. She spoke about responsibility, about employee ownership, about making decisions that did not treat people as numbers in a spreadsheet. When asked what wealth had taught her, she paused. Money can protect options, she said, but it cannot create dignity. You either practice that before people know your value, or you lose the right to stand beside them after they do. Ethan turned off the television after that. Not because he was angry, because he finally heard her. Isabella did not rebuild her life around revenge. She returned to work, but differently. She stopped hiding from every room that carried her family name. She led with the same quietness Ethan had once mistaken for weakness, only now she no longer made herself smaller to be loved. Peace came slowly. Some mornings still hurt. Some memories still arrived without invitation. But her life belonged to her again, and that was the justice she had chosen. If Isabella's story reminded you that dignity is worth more than wealth, share it with someone who needs that reminder today. And remember, sometimes the greatest fortune isn't hidden in a bank account, but in knowing your own worth before anyone else does.